Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday. I'll be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. We've got another great show for you, great contributors, so sit back, relax, enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off with a look at personal finance. Joining us on the line, she is a personal finance reporter for The Motley Fool. I'm talking about Mari Backman. Mari, so great to talk to you again, as always. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think this morning we're going to talk a little bit about credit reports and credit reporting, things that viewers, listeners in this case, should know. Lots transpired during the pandemic, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, first of all, just a little overview of what a credit report is, because, not everyone is well-versed on credit reports. So basically, there are three reporting bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. These reporting bureaus basically establish a credit report for you. That credit report lists all of your debts, all of your open accounts, loans, whatnot. It doesn't, when I say accounts, just to clarify, it's not your bank accounts and stuff, it's your credit accounts. So like your credit cards, or if you have a mortgage, if you have an auto loan. And the bureaus keep tabs in these credit reports on how timely you are with your bills and how many new accounts you're opening at once. And then all the information in your credit report basically goes into calculating your credit score. Now, you want to know the ironic thing, Jeff, and I've always found this so frustrating. Your credit report itself doesn't actually have your credit score, which is just frankly annoying.
It is
there's
annoying.
other ways to get your credit score.
You got to pay for it,
really
right?
annoying.
A lot of times you have to pay for it if you're not part of a credit card. That gives you that.
Yeah, I mean, usually these days a lot of credit cards and like your banks will give it to you for free. So there are free ways to get it. Otherwise, you do have to buy it. Credit reports are also free to an extent. You're entitled to one free copy of your report from each bureau every single year, except for right now. Right now, and so get this, right now, you're actually entitled to a free copy of your credit report every single week until April of 2022. So basically, if you wanted to, you could go crazy and pull a copy of your credit report for free weekly for the next year. Definitely don't recommend doing that unless there's a specific issue you're following or tracking. But I do think it's important, Jeff, to check your credit report in general. And it's definitely important to check it this year. And I'm going to get into why. So first of all, your credit report is something that a lender is going to pull whenever you apply for a loan. So for example, if you're looking to get a car loan, if you're looking to take out a mortgage, there's going to be a pull on your credit because basically before someone goes ahead and says, here, you can borrow a whole large chunk of money, they're going to want to see how responsibly you manage your money. Do you have a lot of loans outstanding? How many delinquencies do you have? Meaning, are there debts that, you've borrowed money on and you haven't paid off? You've just let them sit. These are red flags to lenders. So it's very important that the information on your credit report paint a good picture. And if there's information on there that doesn't paint a good picture, generally you have an opportunity to change it. So that, for example, if your credit report shows, okay, this person has a huge amount of outstanding debt, well, what you can do is you can work on paying off some of that debt or maybe even consolidating some of that debt so, it's not such a red flag. So it's always a good idea to check your credit report every few months. The other reason it's important to check your credit report is because credit reports can either highlight fraudulent activity that's taken place that you need to resolve, or they can contain errors. All right, so let's break down both of those. Fraudulent activity, what might you see on your credit report? Well, you might see an open account for a certain credit card and go to yourself, hey, I never opened that credit card. I don't even know what that credit card is. If you see something like that, you'll want to investigate because it could be that somebody opened a credit card in your name and is racking up charges and is not paying those charges. And then all of a sudden, that negative activity gets put on your credit report. So that's definitely something you want to look into. If you see accounts on your credit report that you don't recognize, that's a red flag. That should tell you, let me figure out what's going on here because you don't want to let that sort of situation continue. But the other thing, Jeff, is that, credit reports the credit reporting bureaus, they're not perfect, and sometimes they get information reported to them incorrectly. So credit report errors are not necessarily their fault, but credit report errors are common. It's actually estimated that credit reports, about 20% of credit reports contain an error, and that's just a general statistic. And I can also tell you that last week I read a report saying that credit report complaints about errors escalated like crazy during the pandemic. In other words, there was a huge uptick in reporting errors over the past year. So what's a reporting error, right? Well, an error could be a debt in your name that you never actually incurred. And that is not actually an identity theft situation, it's just a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And that could happen if, let's say, your name is Tom Jones. There's probably a whole bunch of Tom Joneses in the country. So it could be that someone with your same name has an open credit account and maybe has a lot of debt on it. And that person owns that account legitimately and is working on paying it off, but somehow it got put on your credit report. That's just a mistake. But that's the sort of mistake you want corrected, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
Uh,
So
I don't know. I didn't know if that was
another-
rhetorical or not, but I was going to answer one way or the
No,
other.
no.
Sorry,
Right,
Mark.
I kind of put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
But here are a couple of things that are a couple of specific issues that are arising because of the pandemic too. So, there's been a lot of relief available to consumers during the pandemic. This is a good thing, right? So there's been mortgage forbearance where you can hit pause on your home loan. Especially last year, a lot of credit card issuers told customers you can skip some payments, you won't be penalized. The problem is, though, because all of this was just happening so fast, in the case of forbearance, loan servicers were being overwhelmed. Credit card companies were inundated with, requests. So what happened, sort of innocently, is that a lot of people were granted permission to skip payments, but the credit card companies and the loan servicers and all that, they couldn't necessarily keep up with that on the reporting end.
Mm-hmm.
So some consumers got reported as delinquent when they shouldn't have been.
That's not good.
And, it's not good. And luckily, what I'm understanding is that, all of these different, companies are stepping up and saying, okay, yeah, that was our error. Sure, let's get that corrected. But the point is, if you don't check your credit report, you won't know that you have some sort of black mark that shouldn't be there. So I'll say it again, moral of the story, check your credit report. Always try to check it at least a couple of times a year, but right now, make sure to give it a check.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was actually looking at Experian. I have an account with Experian.com and checking my credit score, but also credit report. Mari, what about some of these credit cards some people may have that offer some look at your credit score? They give you, what your current score is, and then you can, do little slides to say, okay, well, if you had a little revolving debt, you'd be up to 807 or 810, or if you had a mortgage or you don't have enough of a length of history. How good are those to utilize and explore in addition to getting your credit report?
Yeah, those are great to explore because, first of all, like I said, your credit report doesn't actually have your credit score, which is a number you'll want to know. So it's definitely helpful to know what that is. Mm-hmm. The credit bureaus also, if you create an account with each one, they'll also give you that information. All of that is really useful to have because basically what they'll do is they'll tell you, all right, this is your, this is what your kind of your credit picture looks like, mm-hmm. but here are some ways that you can make it better, So when I look at I think it's my Experian report. I looked at it recently. It showed me what my credit utilization was. So credit utilization, that's the amount of revolving credit you're using at once. So that, if I owe $1,000 on my credit card and I have a $10,000 credit limit, I'm at 10% utilization, and that's really good. You want to keep that at or below 30%. So you might take a look and see, oh, you're at 45% utilization. That's not great. You're at 70% of your utilization. That's really not good. That means you're using the bulk of your available credit. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of thing that if you apply for a loan, someone's going to look at it and say, why is this person so reliant on credit cards? Does this person not have a steady job? What's going on? Does this person not manage his money well? And I'll tell you, Jeff, it's not just that you may be denied a loan if your credit report doesn't paint the best picture. you might, for example, be denied an apartment rental, right? Let's say you want to rent
Yeah.
an apartment. Well, the landlord's going to pull your credit report because they're going to want to see, hey, what's going on with this person? Is this person reliable? Let me see what this person's been doing in terms of borrowing and other things. And a lot of people go into a rental situation thinking, okay, well, I'm applying for an apartment that, my rent is going to be $1,500 a month, and I make $90,000 a year. So that's enough to cover, anyone who could do math can tell you that salary is enough to cover $1,500 a month rent, except, oh, wait, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get approved if you have a really shaky credit history. So, yeah, you definitely want to look at those reports, and you want to look at your credit report even if you have a really good credit score. When I sign on to one of my bank accounts, sometimes it'll say, here, see your credit score. And okay, I'll take a look, and it's like, all right, and this really happened to us. My husband and I, we were refinancing our mortgage, and we took a look at our credit scores. We're like, all right, we're in good shape, whatever. And it was like, oh, let's just make sure we check our credit reports before we apply. My husband actually had a mistake on his credit report.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, a month later, while we were trying to refinance, his credit score went down because of that. Because the score sort of caught up with the incorrect information that got added to his credit report. And we had to scramble and correct that. But we were like, wow, thank goodness we got ahead of that so that we were able to get it corrected in time. So you don't want to just take a look at your credit score and say, all right, that number's fine, so there's nothing to worry about. You want to go into your credit report because, again, there might be something incorrect, or it might, you might kind of get alerted, oh, what's this account that I don't recognize? Someone's opening an account in my name. You really want to look at that document.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that one of the fallouts from this pandemic is going to be, obviously it's financial, but the credit risk, the credit issues are going to be really huge. And I think this is going to be one of the lasting impacts for many people. I mean, I could be wrong, of course. Mari, we're going to leave it there. Really, we could go into. I think we could probably do. I can sense the passion on this topic with you. We could probably do a few hours on this. Maybe we will one day. Maybe we'll have a special podcast dedicated to credit reports. But on that note, Mari, have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
That sounds good.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little tech, and joining us on the line, he is lead advisor and executive producer for Seven Investing. We're talking about Daniel Klein. Dan, thanks so much welcome back to the program. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I almost got confused with your title, but I got it. I put it all together really.
We're just making up the titles. When you work at an 8-person company, titles are not all that relevant.
No, they are, because you're wearing many hats, right? I mean, it's not like you are, like any small business, smaller operation, I should say. It's not small in terms of scale. You wear many hats. You do many things. So one title probably doesn't define anything.
As you know, sometimes you're the boss, sometimes you're the janitor.
Absolutely. As I was watching a Grateful Dead documentary many months ago, and they said, the situation is the boss. So the situation kind of determines who the boss is going to be. But Dan, let's talk about streaming. I know this is a kind of a passion of yours. You have tested out all the streaming and continue to test out all the streaming services and devices, but it looks like we're going to see more streaming concerts post-COVID.
Yeah, so this is something that should have happened pre-COVID. So if you're a band, like 90% of your revenue comes from touring. And many of the bands I'm a big fan of are no longer full-time bands. So my favorite band is a band out of Boston, Buffalo Tom, and they all have day jobs. They have a rich history, and during the pandemic, their lead singer has been playing live shows that have raised a ton of money for charity. And I've never really understood that when they put out an album and they do maybe 10 to 12 US dates, why those appearances wouldn't be live streamed. And largely it's because the venues are not set up for that, because most bands, so the Rolling Stones on their last tour, which got aborted, they were planning 13 dates. There is more demand for the Rolling Stones than 13 dates. So if you set up venues to live stream, then you're going to be able to sell way more tickets and you're not going to take away from people attending live. Like, I still want to go to a live concert, but if I live in West Palm Beach and the closest show to me is Atlanta, Georgia, or Washington, D.C., it may not be feasible for me to go to that. So you are going to see venues actually put in the equipment so any band, any concert can have this revenue. Now, at first, it's going to be for need reason. If you open up your concert venue at 40% capacity with a lot of plexiglass and social distancing, well, you can't make money on a concert unless you charge much more. So being able to sell a live stream will make sense. But even after that, look, a lot of young families like can't justify going out from 7 o'clock at night to 1 in the morning, but they could absolutely sit in their living room and watch a live stream. So I think this is just a really logical extension, and I think you're going to see this move to Broadway. I think you're going to see this move to to having some events play live in movie theaters in different venues. This just makes sense for everyone involved.
Yeah, it really cuts down on the. I mean, I like touring, and I think seeing people in live, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're touring, is not always it's rigorous, right? I mean, it really wears you down. Getting on the bus, usually there's a tour bus. Sometimes you take a plane. Setting up the equipment. If you can be in one spot for a longer period of time, I think that's probably better for the body. Probably get a better quality experience, and it's amazing now what you can do over the stream, and you don't need that much bandwidth. I mean, you need to have a good digital soundboard. You need to be able to have good microphones, but there's a lot with technology that can be done to make this almost a very enriching experience, I would think.
Yeah, I think we're seeing this with sort of legacy acts in Las Vegas. Where if you're Jennifer Lopez or Lady Gaga, you go and you do 60 dates a year in Vegas. Well, imagine doing that, playing a handful of cities and making some of those shows available. You're going to have diehard fans who pay for every show, who watch you 4 or 5 times a year. You're going to have casual fans who just buy into one show. And you can certainly do the event show that plays in movie theaters or wherever it is. But I look at, the bands I support, which are largely, bands that in their heyday could sell out, 1,000-seat venues, not, arenas. And they have very, very loyal fans, but they're not necessarily at this age willing to do, 75-date tours where they play every club in every city. So maybe they'll play New York, Boston, LA, Seattle, Washington, a few other cities. And if they make every show available, even if they're only adding 10-15% incremental revenue, that's really meaningful money. So this is part of sort of the artist revolution. I think we're going to see a lot with non-fungible tokens,
Yeah.
where artists sell, exclusive content or the ability to, hear a song nobody heard or get front row seats at a show or whatever it is. And I think streaming being built into the venue, so you as an artist don't have to take on that expense. It's fixed cameras, the technology is there. I also think that makes those venues something you could use for other things. During the day, maybe there'll be, the equivalent of, TED Talks where people like me are giving speeches on, financial literacy or whatever it is. Once you have that capability, you can use it for so many things. And I think it's going to become sort of the norm for any of the, maybe not every club, but certainly your more well-known clubs.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about. I'm a big Deadhead, as you know, and I'm thinking about how having this type of technology maybe could have extended the life of the band. Of course, the band still tours, but not some of the members are no longer with us. Dan, let's shift gears. Talk about Uber. Uber has there's a sign out now for hire. Right, they are looking for more drivers now that vaccinations have begun in this country and other places. What can you tell us about their upcoming hiring practices?
Yeah, so Uber doesn't make any sense until they don't use drivers. And I'm not sure that will ever be possible. So, Uber as a business model, and I hate to be negative because I use Uber all the time. I love the product, but we've talked about this before. When Uber came out, they didn't assume they'd have competition. So they went, not only are we more convenient than cabs, we're way cheaper. And here's the reality. They only needed to be more convenient and a little cheaper. So right now, if I want to take an Uber from my condo to the airport, which is maybe 2 miles, it might cost me like $7 or $8. A cab would cost me 20. Uber, there isn't enough money to go around for the driver, for the company as the middleman. So they're kind of in an unwinnable position, and that's causing a shortage of drivers. If you're an Uber driver, it's hard to make significant money. You have to work really, really long hours, and they've done some really good things to to be positive for their drivers, giving them same day loans so they can gas up, so they can get something to eat in the morning, discounts at various places. But the Uber business model isn't going to work. And I think the reason there's a shortage of drivers is people are starting to understand that.
Dan, and that may be the case. What about competitors? Lyft, I don't know all the competitors. How is Lyft doing relative to Uber, or
They're,
are they the
they're
same situation?
yeah, they're both doing badly, and so are all the food delivery companies.
Mm.
It's a struggling proposition because there's just not enough room in the financial model for it. So, we look at any of these companies and we go, okay, how are they going to make money? And the reality is they're not going to make money until there's a major change. If Uber and Lyft either need to merge or one needs to go out of business, and then they need to raise their prices significantly. Like, you should be charging what it costs. The reason cabs are expensive compared to Uber is because cabs are correctly priced.
Yeah. Plus, they have the medallion that you have to pay, right? Isn't that some of that factored in? Or maybe
It, it,
not. Maybe that's what
it
the driver has to pay in order to be able to drive the cab, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And the price of a medallion in most cities that use that system has plummeted because of Uber and Lyft.
Yeah.
And the reality is that was always sort of a cap on capacity to artificially inflate demand. And I mean, what getting a cab in New York has never been an easy prospect.
No.
And Uber and Lyft fixed that. Like I love the fact that in Las Vegas, where it was never particularly easy to get a cab unless you were at a hotel, where you can now call an Uber or a Lyft, and I would pay more for the privilege. Like, I always tip well when I'm in an Uber or a Lyft because the difficult circumstances. But unless you're working weekends and dealing with people throwing up in the back of your car and all the like horrible things you have to deal with as an Uber or Lyft driver, it's really difficult to make a living. You see, fields of Uber drivers camped out at the Wawa near the airport in West Palm Beach. And look, this is an industry that it's going to collapse. And I think there'll be rideshare? Yes. Do I think it'll look like it does now? I don't, because there isn't enough money to go around, and we gloss that over. But they can't find drivers because drivers can make money doing other gigs that just pay better.
Yeah. And look, you got to pay for gas, pay for the car, the maintenance. Also, you got to take care of your family. And I think people are going to make that independent decision where they want to apply their skills, and whether it is working as an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, cab driver, or maybe working construction or working in an office, they're going to determine what's best for
And,
them. So go ahead, Dan.
and even from a gig point of view, would you rather be delivering Instacart orders and not have to deal with people in your car? Like, a friend of
Yes.
mine,
Yes.
his brother-in-law was in Vegas and overindulged and made a whole mess of the back of the cab, back of the Uber, and the Uber driver was nonchalant about it because it happens so often. Well, if that was my choice, or I could go like pick orders for Instacart, I think that's what I'd be doing. Like, the gig economy is coming to a reckoning. Like, it's great that you can make money when you want on demand, but it doesn't make that much sense if at the end of the day, when you factor in gas and maintenance and all the other factors, you're not actually making money.
Yeah. Dan, I think a lot of this, I think a lot of change obviously is stimulated by the pandemic. Wouldn't you say that a lot of this reckoning really, as we return back to work, whether it's a hybrid model, whatever that model is, this new normal, we're going to see new services pop up and rethinking. There's going to be rethinking of the rideshare industry.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, always a pleasure chatting with you. Great set of topics, divergent themes, but important nonetheless. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
I appreciate it, Jeff. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye. Welcome back. Well, time to take a look at real estate, what's happening in the real estate arena, and lots of things going on. Joining us on the line, he's from Dow Jones Market Watch, where he serves as the real estate reporter. He does a few other things as well. Don't want to minimize his effort, but I'm talking about Jacob Passy. Jacob, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I have to think of you do so much at Market Watch. You cover a lot of different issues, so I can't just say the real estate reporter anymore. We talked about travel last week. We always talk about real estate, mortgage rates. You cover personal finance. You're a bird of many feathers. So let's talk about, but today you want to talk about real estate. I know you've got some new housing, new construction numbers. Want to kind of put it in some context for the listeners.
Yeah, so the Today's Friday, so today the monthly housing starts report, which tracks, new home construction and building permits across the country, came out from the Census Bureau, and it was good news. It was a big rebound from February. So in February, construction activity slowed quite a bit across the country, largely due to the weather. Folks will remember, especially like in Texas with that massive cold snap they had, that, was playing out across much of the country, saw, snowstorms on the East Coast, et cetera. So that slowed things down quite a bit. But things have rebounded, which is what we need to see. And the reason we need to see that is because of how much of a shortage we have in this country. So this week, another report came out from Freddie Mac, and they calculated that there is basically a gap of 4 million homes that are not in the market to meet the demand. That's how much of a shortage we have right now, and that's grown by 50% since 2018. So in the past 3 years alone, we've seen basically, a 50% increase in the shortage of housing we need to meet the demand among home buyers. So it kind of paints, how competitive the market is right now.
Yeah, very, very. If you're short 4 million homes to meet demand, that's a pretty big number. Jacob, what does this mean? I think obviously it means prices. It means much more competition. Does that drive prices up for homes both in urban areas and suburbia?
Totally. The shortage of homes across the country is driving the price in a number of ways. So, it's much more common these days to see bidding wars, and it's not just in, places like San Francisco. Those are playing out nationwide. I have friends who, face bidding wars for homes in the Boston area. There was, I think, a home in the DC area that supposedly, I think, got like 100 offers or something crazy. So we're seeing, a really competitive market, lots of buyers, but very few homes. So more people are turning to the market for newly constructed homes, which are, so first off, the competition for existing homes means that prices are just going through the roof. So a lot of people, are being, burned in that way. Mm-hmm. And then because there are so few existing homes to go around, lots of people are now turning to the market for new homes, including first-time buyers, where usually, first-time buyers don't buy newly constructed homes because they're more expensive. So, folks are going into the market for new homes, which is more expensive. And, when we talk about, there being a shortage of 4 million, just to put that in context, so the way that they report, the Census Bureau reports home construction figures is, and in general, home sales are done in annual rates. So the construction industry in March was building homes at a rate of, nearly like 1.8 million homes a year. That's kind of the annual rate. That's the pace they were building at. And that was the highest that figure has been since 2006. So we're talking about, a record high rate of home building, and it doesn't even come to meet half of the, if that rate were to, for the rest of the year, we wouldn't even build half of what we need to build to meet demand. So this is going to be a problem for years to come because, you figure that, probably more and more people are going to enter the market because millennials are, getting married, having kids. Gen Z is right behind them, getting married, having kids. Even some reports suggest, Gen Z may be even more into home ownership and more, along that path than millennials were. So you're going to see demand continue to remain strong. And, there's also the extent to which, existing homes, some of them, the existing homes in the market right now, you're seeing investors buy those up and convert them into rentals. There's also an extent to which homes just over time, need, fall into disrepair. So there's an extent to which, you see a few 100,000 homes probably a year go, into such level of disrepair that they basically fall out of the market. They need to be, condemned basically to because they're not habitable anymore. So, when you look at all that, and we look at the current rate of home building, which this was an all-time high. This isn't necessarily, or not an all-time high, but at the highest level in well over a decade. That's not necessarily sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be, the new normal for some time to come.
Jacob, what about some of the commodities, some of the materials that people are using to build homes? I've heard anecdotally from other people about a friend of mine was going to Home Depot or Lowe's or one of the brands to find some lumber and said he was having trouble finding lumber. Is that the case? And that I would think would have another impact on driving up the cost of housing for new construction.
Totally. So yeah, new construction and renovations. Lumber is much more expensive right now. Some of that is probably residual from earlier in the pandemic. There were shutdowns of the sawmills that produce lumber for a period of time. Like we saw shutdowns in many sectors of the economy, and so that created a backlog to some extent. Then on top of that, there were for a while there, after the pandemic started, there were questions as to, whether it was going to cause a downturn in housing, like an overarching downturn. That's obviously not what's happened. And so some sawmills basically reported that they had anticipated demand to shrink because of the pandemic, when in fact the opposite is what happened. It spurred demand. So that also contributed. But there's also just, when we're talking about home building happening at the fastest pace since 2006, that's a lot of builders needing a lot of wood.
Yes.
It's not just lumber. We're seeing shortages of steel as well. Some of this is also related to, global issues. There are trade tariffs in place, so maybe not shortages, but, prices are higher because of tariffs on steel from China, lumber from Canada. And then on top of that, there's, even the I don't know if your listeners are familiar, but there is a shortage of semiconductors, which are microchips that are used in a variety of things that are electronic. And so because of the semiconductor shortage right now, there is a massive backlog on appliances. So for folks renovating their kitchens or building a new home, it's going to take longer to get your new refrigerator, your new microwave, your new stove than it would have a few months ago. So we're seeing these, delays and backlogs and higher prices, across a wide range of goods and materials that go into constructing a home.
And, I think it's probably going to be to the point where we have to get back to whatever this new normal looks like, that we could, like anything else, if you shut down the economy, ramp it back up, you can't just turn a switch and turn everything back on. Sounds like that's what happened with the anticipation of wood demand and other materials. Sounds like, we're going to be in a kind of a wait and see. Jacob, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. I had not anticipated the semiconductor issue, but I appreciate that. And, I guess I won't be out buying appliances this weekend. Have a great, wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Talk next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, and let's take a look at what's going on Capitol Hill. Joining us, of course, they're better known as the Legal Eagles, but they are also known as David Levine, Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, how are you today?
We are great, Jeff. We hope everybody's having a good spring. A spring has sprung, and we are.
Are we great?
You are great,
Kevin. It's as we record this now. It is a lovely sunny morning in Washington D.C. with a hint of chill in the air. And before we move on to our segment, I want to do our call outs to all our listeners who turn 100 this week. I'm going to start reading their names and consume the entire segment. But unfortunately, I'm guessing we have no 100-year-old listeners because we're just not that interesting. So, Jeff, why don't we get to the real substance?
Yes, let's do that.
By the way, that was David Al Roker Levine talking.
David Al Roker Levine. All right, Kevin Walsh, I know you want to talk about cybersecurity.
So David's having a great week, but I'd say this has been a less than great week from a regulatory guidance standpoint.
Wait, Kevin, are you saying you're insecure?
I mean, I've been secure, and now I'm insecure in need of Secure 2.0.
Okay,
Fair enough.
That's a good comeback.
Fair enough. We'll make sure to get you an antivirus, but in the meantime, maybe a vaccine of some kind. But why don't you keep going?
So, I mean, the big thing that's happened this week is that the Department of Labor unveiled new, and people are saying guidance, and I'm going to say sub-regulatory guidance, but they unveiled new sub-regulatory guidance related to cybersecurity, and they did it in kind of three pieces of website updates. So, I mean, it's not a Federal Register thing; it's just kind of a PDF. The first of them is tips for hiring a service provider. So they're designed to, encourage plan fiduciaries.
Wait, Kevin, can you explain what the Federal Register is and why it's important? Just kidding. Keep going.
Okay.
He's in an interesting mood today, isn't he, Kevin? It's fun.
He is. He's very energetic this morning.
We like it. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Kev.
I thought we were going to have a whole segment of listening to David's cat.
That'd be interesting.
So the first piece of guidance relates to tips for hiring service providers. And they include things like ask your service provider about what they're doing about cybersecurity, check for their insurance, get reps as to what they're doing, see if they're having an annual audit. What's kind of odd about this is that when I scour the text of ERISA regularly, and I have looked for the cybersecurity section repeatedly, and I am yet to find the cybersecurity section in ERISA. David, have you found the citation to the cybersecurity section?
Actually, Kevin, I have, because if you look at what we've experienced on a topic that will not be said that begins with an M, we both know that the Department of Labor cites, when it puts out this type of informational guidance, which is much like its target date tip sheet, which people cite as law, which is not, but at the same time people look to it. They say that when they're doing enforcement, that this comes from ERISA's 404 fiduciary duties, like prudence and loyalty discussions. That's what they cite you in investigations. And I am highly confident that when and if there's investigations, that is exactly what we cited as the regulatory authority. But maybe you disagree, Kevin.
No, David, I agree with you. I was just voicing some frustration that they didn't go through a regulatory process here.
I know. I was kind of teeing the ball for you.
The key here is that if you're a plan fiduciary, it's worth taking a look at this guidance because it'll help. It could help give a better perspective of what DOL is likely to look for in investigations. And as we know from other investigations, other topics, that even if ERISA has even if it's a kind of a secret made up rule by the department, for example, missing participants, the department can bring or does bring investigations to try to encourage plan fiduciaries to comply with its beliefs of what a prudent fiduciary does. The second piece of guidance really is laid out for plan service providers and record keepers. And it says, best practices include having a formal, well-documented cybersecurity program, having annual risk assessments, defining roles and responsibilities, having periodic training, and kind of other factors. And what I found to be particularly interesting was, the document came out of the blue. There wasn't really a notice and comment period. And it has a pretty comprehensive list of things that the department believes to be best practices. So, again, if you're a plan service provider or a plan fiduciary, it's probably worth taking a look at these documents to, understand what the department believes to be, their expectations, even if they haven't gone through a rulemaking process. And then the last piece that they issued was online security tips aimed at participants and beneficiaries. And I thought this was really the highlight of the guidance, because in other areas we've seen the department think that the burden of compliance or the burden of protecting participants falls solely on plan fiduciaries and service providers. By issuing this third piece of guidance, the department appears to be recognizing that cybersecurity doesn't work unless the participants do their role. So it includes things like using complex passwords, opting into multi-factor authentication if it's available, keeping your contact information current, which I think is a very important participant step.
Go figure.
But it's nice now that the department has laid out a framework that plan fiduciaries, plan service providers, and participants can apply if they want to try to meet kind of the standards that the department's articulated. At the same time, I think you can hear some of my frustration that the process they've used to do this doesn't appear to have involved a formal process of engagement with the regulated community. David, do you want to chime in? Because I feel like I've been too negative here.
Sure. Well, let me comment on a couple things. I too share the concern because cybersecurity is far broader than a benefit plan, and there's been lots of commentary about that, and there's been lots of trade group work. For instance, like Spark has its Data Security Oversight Board and its principles there that I think are very aspirational. They're not rigid, and I think that's a positive thing. And I think, truthfully, on the record keeper process items, a number of those show up in the DOL tip sheets. As a result, I think that it does show some listening. I also think you make an excellent point, Kevin, that it will be very interesting because the DOL, understandably, is usually very participant friendly. And that's their job and completely understood. But at times, there's always been the debate of when something goes wrong and nobody's truly to blame on paper, who's to blame? By having the tip sheet for security, I think for participants, even though you can tell Kevin and I think that this probably deserved to go through more formal rulemaking, or does deserve, that if the Department of Labor in enforcement starts to say, well, you must follow these best practices, and if we can show participants, or if we can raise, well, did the participant do it? It's hard for the Department of Labor to say in one breath, it's all on you on the plan, but this based on our informal guidance. But then at the same time, the participant has no obligation. We're not trying to short anybody here, but I'm curious to see how this sorts out. I do think it's too prescriptive, and it does cause me concern because this world is rapidly evolving. Also, we don't want it to be check the box or other things. So we're going to have to see. It is something that I think gives some more meat on the bones. I know Kevin and I, with a lot of clients and our other colleagues, when we've been representing anybody, we're a record keeper or a plan sponsor, we've been through this discussion a lot about how do you do things. I think in the end, I come down to it can be useful in some ways, but everybody needs to remember, all parties, that there is no one size fits all. Every organization is different. The DOL sometimes says you should be looking at this with a record keeper or other service provider. It's not just record keepers. And the challenge that comes to mind is a plan with $10 billion is not a plan with $5 million. There's different contracting, there's different leverage. It's business. Even though it's about people's lives and retirement, these are business transactions. So it's important to recognize that you can't always do everything that someone says is a best practice because each case is different. And on that note, Jeff, I will stop there.
Well, gentlemen, this is obviously something we're going to be talking a lot about, and I would, this is a very important topic, not only in the field of benefits, but obviously in the field of just general financial information, general information for consumers and employers. We're going to leave it there, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning, and we look forward to having you back again next week. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Bye. Well, that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, and of course, our website. We're back again tomorrow for BRN AM. We've got another very special guest on some very important topics. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.